AITA for staying home after my wife said her family needed a break from me. I'm Tristan, 36, and Leah and I had been together for 11 years, married for 8. For most of that time, I thought the tension between me and her family was just one of those in-law problems people learn to live with. Her mom, Diane, could be overbearing. Her younger sister, Paige, could be defensive when it came to Leah. And I'm not the kind of person who keeps smiling once I know somebody is taking a shot at me. What I didn't understand was that a lot of the tension I thought I was reacting to had been built before I even walked into the room. Leah had always hated disappointing her family. I knew that. What I didn't know was how often she solved that problem by making me the reason she was saying no. Paige's engagement dinner was supposed to be simple. She had gotten engaged a few weeks earlier, and this was a small family dinner to celebrate. I had already set the evening aside. Leah had talked about what she was wearing, what gift we should bring, and whether Paige's fiancé's parents would stay late. About an hour before we were supposed to leave, Leah walked into the bedroom while I was getting dressed and said, "I think you should stay home tonight." I thought she was joking. What? I just think it would be better if I went alone. Better for who? She hesitated. Everyone needs a break from you. I stopped buttoning my shirt. Everyone. Please don't do this. I'm asking who everyone is. My mom. Paige. Me, honestly. I don't want a night to turn into tension. Did Paige say she doesn't want me there? Leah looked away. She wants a nice engagement dinner. That's not what I asked. You know what my family is like when things get awkward. Again, not an answer. I was irritated, but Paige's engagement dinner was not the place for a family showdown. If Paige really didn't want me there, I wasn't going to force myself into her night just to prove a point. So I said, if Paige doesn't want me there, I'll stay home. Leah said, "Thank you." That, "thank you," bothered me more than I expected. She left. I changed into sweatpants, ordered food, and tried to convince myself I had done the mature thing by not pushing. About 2 hours later, Paige called. Paige had barely contacted me directly for the last few years. Most invitations came through Leah. I had assumed Paige disliked me and preferred dealing with her sister. I answered with, "Hey, everything okay?" I could hear voices and dishes in the background. She said, "Yeah, I just wanted to ask something before I sit here getting annoyed about it." "Okay. Why didn't you come?" I stared at the TV. "Leah said you guys wanted a break from me." There was a pause. Paige said, "What?" "She said you and your mom didn't want me there because I make things tense." "No. I asked her this afternoon if you were still coming." I sat up. "What did she tell you?" "That you didn't want to. She said you were tired of family stuff and told her to go without you." For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I said, "That's not what happened." Paige's tone changed. "Tristan, why does she keep telling us you won't let her see us?" I gave a short laugh because the question sounded so detached from my reality. "I don't let her see you?" "You know what I mean." "No, I really don't. She says you get upset when she comes over. That you don't want her making plans with us. That she has to check with you before she says yes." "Paige, I have never told Leah she can't see you or your mom. You've never gotten mad about it?" "That's a different question." She went quiet. I said, "Yes, I've been annoyed when your mom calls Saturday morning and expects us to cancel plans we already made. I've told Leah I don't want every weekend decided by a last-minute phone call. That is not the same as telling her she can't see her family." Paige said, "That's not how she describes it." "How does she describe it?" "Like she has to manage your reaction if she wants to do anything with us." "Does she say I stop her?" "She doesn't always use that exact word." That sentence stayed with me. Before hanging up, Paige said, "I'm not trying to start something at my engagement dinner. This just doesn't make sense." "Yeah. And for what it's worth, I did want you here." I congratulated her again and told her we'd talk later. Then I sat there replaying comments from the last several years. Diane saying, "Nice of Tristan to spare you for the afternoon." Diane asking Leah, "Are you sure you can stay that long?" One Thanksgiving, Diane had laughed and said, "At least this year Tristan lets you stay through dessert." I had always looked to Leah when those comments happened. Leah would roll her eyes, laugh them off, and say her mom was being dramatic. I believed her because she was my wife. I thought she was the one person in the room who understood why I was annoyed. When Leah got home, it was after 11. She came in carrying leftovers and talking about the dinner. Paige loved the gift. It was actually really nice. I said, Paige called me. Leah stopped for half a second, then put the food on the counter. Why? She wanted to know why I refused to come. Leah closed her eyes briefly. Why did you tell her I didn't want to go? She shouldn't have called you from the dinner. That's not what I asked. I didn't want this becoming a thing tonight. You told me they wanted me home. You told them I wanted to stay home. It was already a thing. She put the leftovers away. I was trying to keep the night calm. By lying to both sides. Don't make it sound so calculated. I don't know what to call it yet. She turned around. Fine. I handled it badly. Paige also asked why you keep telling them I don't let you see them. Her face tightened. She's exaggerating. She used those words. I have never told them you don't let me do anything. Then what have you told them? I've said you get annoyed sometimes. That's true. I've said you don't like how much my mom expects. Also true. And I may have used you as an excuse a few times when I didn't want to deal with my mom. That part one already knew. Years earlier, before we were married, Diane called Leah at the last minute and expected us to change plans for a family dinner. Leah didn't want to go. She complained for 20 minutes, then called her mom and said, Tristan already planned something for us. Afterward, she looked guilty. I had said, if blaming me gets us out of it this once, fine. Blame me. At the time, it felt harmless. There were a few other early occasions when Leah told Diane I wanted a quiet night, even though Leah was the one who didn't feel like going anywhere. I didn't love it, but I didn't correct it either. I figured if Diane wanted to think I was the boring husband who liked staying home, that was a small price for avoiding a fight. So I asked, when you say a few times, how many? I don't know. 5. I don't know, Tristan. 20. Why are you doing this? Because your sister thinks I control whether you see your family. She's being dramatic. Your mother has made comments about me letting you stay places for years. That's how she talks. No. Apparently, that's how she talks after you talk. Leah got upset. She said, I was just trying to avoid fights. With them? Yes. So I got the resentment instead. You had some passive-aggressive comments. You didn't have fights. I spent years thinking your family disliked me for reasons I couldn't understand. They did dislike you sometimes because you were cold to them. That can be true too. It doesn't answer what you told them. That was the first night I noticed the pattern clearly. Whenever I asked a specific question, Leah answered with an intention, a feeling, or something I had done wrong. Eventually, she said she was exhausted and went to bed. The next morning, I checked one date Paige had mentioned. I didn't go through Leah's phone. I opened my own messages with her. Paige had said Leah missed a family dinner the previous spring because Tristan was in a mood and didn't want her going. In my messages, Leah had written that afternoon, I really don't want to go tonight. I'm exhausted and Mom is going to make it a whole thing if I cancel. I had replied, then don't go. You're allowed to be tired. Later she wrote, she's already guilt-tripping me. I answered, tell her you need a night off. We can stay in. Nothing about forbidding her to go. I remembered that dinner because Diane made a comment the next time I saw her. Hope our little get-together wasn't too much trouble for you last week. At the time, I thought she was just being difficult. I had said, Leah didn't want to go. Diane looked at me like I had insulted Leah. Now I understood why. Leah came into the kitchen and saw the message thread open. What are you doing? Checking one date Paige mentioned. Seriously? It's my conversation too. I showed her. You told me you didn't want to go. Paige says you told them I didn't want you to go. Leah barely looked at the screen. I probably said you were tired too. That's not what Paige remembers. Paige remembers things in the version that makes her protective of me. Where did she get that version? Leah didn't answer. Later that day, Paige asked if I wanted to talk without Leah there. I said yes. She started by saying, I'm not deciding you're innocent of everything because one story didn't match. Fair. She told me Leah often said things like, Tristan won't like it if I stay late, or I need to see what kind of mood he's in, or he doesn't want to spend another weekend with the family. Some of that was close to true. I did not want every weekend filled with family obligations. I did get irritated when plans changed at the last minute. I had complained more than once that Diane could not hear the word no without turning it into whether Leah loved her family. I told Paige that. She said, So when Leah says she feels like she has to choose between making you mad and making mom mad, that doesn't come from nowhere. No. You can see why that sounds controlling from our side. I can see why it sounds controlling if what you hear is that I get angry whenever she sees you. Did you? Sometimes I got angry about how plans changed. Not that she saw you. Paige pushed back. What's the practical difference if she knows she'll come home to you being irritated? That question bothered me because it wasn't completely unfair. I guess sometimes there may not have been much difference to her. Paige was quiet. I continued, but I never told her she couldn't go. A lot of the time, I was irritated because we already had plans. If Leah wanted to spend a Sunday with you and told me ahead of time, I didn't care. You cared sometimes. Yes, I'm not pretending I was always cheerful about your family. That got a small laugh. No, you definitely weren't. About 4 years earlier, Diane had told Leah at dinner that she wasn't herself anymore since getting married, while looking at me. After a night of little digs about how rarely we visited, I snapped that Leah was an adult and could decide for herself whether she wanted to be there. We left early. I remembered that now because, from their side, my cold reaction looked like proof of the story they had already been hearing. From my side, I had been reacting to a story I didn't know existed. That didn't make their version true. It made it believable. Paige asked if I remembered Thanksgiving 3 years earlier. I did. Diane had said, "At least this year Tristan lets you stay through dessert." Everyone laughed awkwardly. I looked at Leah. She laughed too and said, "Mom, stop." I had decided not to ruin Thanksgiving. Paige said, "That wasn't just Mom being random. Leah had told us you were upset she wanted to spend the whole day there." I said, "We had already agreed we'd stay through dessert." Paige sighed. "I'm starting to understand why this is a mess." So am I. Paige also reminded me that a couple of years earlier, she had texted me asking if Leah could stay at her place after a concert. I had replied, "You don't need my permission. Ask Leah." Afterward, Leah told Paige to coordinate only with her because I didn't like being put on the spot. I had never said that. Paige admitted my reply had sounded annoyed, and I admitted it was because I felt like she was asking me as though I were Leah's parent. That was the pattern in miniature. My real irritation made Leah's edited version easy to believe. Paige didn't suddenly switch sides. She still thought I could be rigid. She still believed some of my reactions made Leah anxious about changing plans. She just no longer seemed certain that anxiety was the same thing as me controlling her. The next few days were strange between Leah and me. We still talked about ordinary things, but every conversation had another conversation underneath it. One afternoon, Diane called. Leah looked at the screen, got up, and went into another room. She had done that for years. I had always assumed she wanted privacy because calls with Diane could be exhausting. Now I wondered how much of it was about keeping the two sides separate. I hated thinking that way. I did not want to become the person who treated every closed door like evidence. So I asked Leah directly, "Have you ever told your family I don't want you seeing them?" She said, "Not like that." What does not like that mean? I've told them you don't like it when they take over our weekends. That's true. I've told them you get upset when I change plans. Also true sometimes. I've told them you think my mom is too involved. True. Then why are you acting like I invented everything? Because Paige thinks those things mean I control whether you see them. Leah said, "I can't control what conclusion Paige reaches. You can control what information you give her." She got irritated. "You're doing that thing where every sentence has to be technically perfect." "No, I'm asking if you gave them the impression I didn't want you around them." She sighed. "Sometimes I explain things in a way they would understand." "What does that mean?" "You know my mom. I don't feel like coming over is not an acceptable answer to her. So if I said, 'Tristan and I need time together,' she would let it go. That's different from saying I'm upset you're seeing them." It didn't start that way. The wording caught me. Start. Leah went quiet. What did it turn into? I don't know. Over time, they already expected you to be the reason, and sometimes it was easier to let them think that. Easier for you. Yes. Not for me. I wasn't trying to hurt you. You were trying not to be the bad guy. That's not fair. It seems pretty exact. She walked toward the kitchen. You know how my mom reacts when I say no. She turns it into whether I love the family, whether I've changed, whether I care. I know. You don't have to deal with that the way I do. I dealt with the version where she thought I was the reason you changed. Leah looked at me. I never told her you were controlling. No, you told them enough to let them get there. She said, I said you'd be upset. Were there times I wouldn't have been? Yes. Did you tell them that? She didn't answer. 2 days later, Paige called again. Her voice was cautious. There's something else I think you should know. I don't want this to sound like I'm taking your side against my sister. Just tell me. Leah has been talking about leaving. I didn't answer. Paige added, the marriage. Leaving the marriage. I sat down. Since when? A couple of months. Maybe longer that she's been unhappy, but she started saying she might actually leave about 2 months ago. I stared at the wall. Paige said, I thought you knew you guys were in that place. No. Nothing. We've had arguments. We've had a rough stretch. She has never told me she's thinking about leaving. Paige cursed quietly. I asked, what exactly did she say? I don't want to repeat every private conversation. That's fair. She said she feels trapped. She said she's always managing your reaction and Mom's reaction. She said she's tired of feeling guilty whenever she spends time with us. Did she say I stop her? Again, not always in those words. Paige. She said you make it clear you don't like it. That part one recognized. Then Paige said, she also said she wasn't sure she wanted the marriage anymore. 2 months. For 2 months, my wife had been discussing the possible end of our marriage with her family, while I still thought we were having the kind of problems married people have and talk through. And the people she was talking to already believed I was controlling. That changed the shape of everything. The engagement dinner looked different now. Leah had wanted to attend a major family event without me. She told me the family did not want me there. She told them I did not want to come. She got to spend the evening as though I had voluntarily removed myself while seeing what it felt like to be there without me. I didn't know whether that part was calculated. I still don't think Leah was sitting around building some master plan. But I knew it was no longer a harmless excuse. That evening, I asked her, are you thinking about leaving me? She froze. Then her first question was, what did Paige tell you? Not no. Now what are you talking about? What did Paige tell you? Answer me first. She sat down. Are you thinking about leaving? I don't know. At least that was honest. How long have you not known? I've been unhappy for a while. How long have you been telling your family? Her eyes narrowed. Paige had no right to tell you that. I stared at her. Your problem is Paige told me? No. My problem is that I trusted my sister with something I was trying to work through. You trusted your sister with the possible end of our marriage before you trusted me with it. I needed someone to talk to. You're allowed to talk about your marriage. Then why are you acting like I did something wrong? Because you weren't just saying you were unhappy. You were telling them I was the reason you couldn't see them. That is part of why I'm unhappy. Then tell me that. I have. You've told me you're tired of arguing about weekends. You have never told me you think I'm controlling you. I didn't say controlling. There it is again. She stood up. You keep trying to pin one word on me because if I never said that word, you think everything else doesn't count. No, I'm trying to figure out how your family ended up believing something that you now want to pretend nobody actually said. Leah's voice rose. You do make me feel guilty sometimes. Then we talk about that. We talk about whether I'm too rigid, whether I get too annoyed, whether you feel pressured. But you don't get to turn my husband is irritated when plans change into my husband is the reason I can't see my family, because that version is easier to explain. I never said you were the only reason. Did you correct them when they acted like I was? She looked away. I asked, why didn't you tell me you were thinking about leaving? For a while, she said nothing. Then she said, because if I said it to you, it became real. That didn't stop you from making it real with them. I needed to know I had people behind me if it fell apart. I said, so you were preparing them for you leaving. I was talking. You were testing what happened if you told them I was making you miserable. I was trying to understand what I wanted. And you needed me to be the villain to do that? She started crying. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt tired. I didn't plan this, she said. I believe you. That surprised her. I don't think you decided years ago to build a story about me. I think you figured out that blaming me made your mom stop pushing you. Then you kept doing it because it worked. You make it sound horrible. It got horrible. I was stuck between you and them. A lot of that pulling came from stories you were telling in both directions. She stared at me. You told me they didn't want me at Paige's dinner. You told them I didn't want to come. You created both sides of that conflict. I just wanted one night without tension. I understand wanting that. I don't understand why the only way you could ask for it was to make both sides blame each other. The next morning, Diane called me. I almost let it go to voicemail, but I decided I was done letting everything pass through Leah. Diane started with, I don't appreciate you cornering Leah over conversations she had with her family. I'm not discussing private details with you, but I do want to know what you think I've done. You know what you've done. No. Apparently, I don't. She sighed. Leah has spent years worrying about whether she's going to upset you if she spends too much time with us. Give me one example. This isn't a courtroom. I'm not asking for proof. I'm asking what happened. She named the dinner from the previous spring. According to Diane, Leah wanted to come, but I was in a bad mood and made her stay home. I said, Leah texted me that afternoon that she was exhausted and didn't want to go. Diane immediately said, that doesn't mean you didn't make her feel like she couldn't. No, it doesn't. It means the story is more complicated than the one you were told. My daughter has no reason to make things up about you. That is exactly what I'm trying to understand. She got defensive. You have been cold to us for years. That's true. You leave early. You complain about how much time we spend together. You act like our family is a burden. Sometimes I did. So don't act like this came from nowhere. I'm not. I'm saying you were reacting to things I never knew Leah had said. Diane told me Leah had been miserable trying to keep everyone happy. I believe that too. That seemed to throw her off. I was not denying every criticism. I had been impatient. I had been short with Diane. I had stopped trying with Paige because I assumed she disliked me. There were plenty of moments I wished I had handled differently. But I was not going to confess to controlling my wife because my actual flaws made the accusation easier to believe. Later, Paige called and said, this is getting stupid. We need to stop talking through Leah. I agreed. She suggested the four of us sit down together the following weekend. Normally, I would have avoided that kind of family confrontation, but avoidance was part of how this had grown. Every difficult thing had been carried by the person with the most control over how it was described. Paige said, I'm not saying we gang up on her. I'm saying everyone says what they actually heard and what actually happened. I agreed. Leah did not. Leah resisted the meeting. She said Paige was betraying her and Diane would only make things worse. The night before, she asked me to apologize to Diane for how this whole thing has felt so everyone could calm down. I told her I would apologize for being cold and for snapping at Diane, but not for stopping Leah from seeing her family because I had not done that. Leah said, can you please not be so literal? I answered, this is the entire problem. You keep asking me to accept responsibility for the version that makes things easier. She said I could choose peace for once. I asked, whose version of peace? By then, I was colder than I wanted to be, but I was done apologizing for things that had never happened. The four of us met about a week after the engagement dinner at Diane's house. We sat around the dining table. Paige looked uncomfortable. Leah looked exhausted. Diane looked like she had already decided the meeting itself proved I was difficult. She opened with, I hope we can all remember Leah is the one being hurt here. Paige said, Mom, that's kind of the problem. We keep deciding who is being hurt before we figure out what happened. Leah said, can we not make this worse? I asked, can I ask one question? Diane nodded. When have I ever told Leah she was not allowed to see you? Diane reacted immediately. You don't have to use those exact words to control somebody. I'm asking for a specific time. She named Thanksgiving. According to Diane, Leah wanted to stay late, but I insisted we leave after dessert and got angry when she resisted. I said, Leah and I agreed before we came that we'd stay through dessert because we had an early morning the next day. That is not what Leah told me. I looked at Leah. She said, you were clear you didn't want to stay late. I said I wanted to leave when we agreed to leave. You were tense about it. Maybe I was. Did you tell your mom you wanted to stay? Leah paused. I don't remember. Paige said, you told me he was pushing you to leave. Leah said, "That's how it felt." I asked, "Did you actually want to stay?" "I don't know. It was 3 years ago." That was fair. I didn't remember every detail either. I said, "Okay, then let's not pretend anybody remembers every second." Diane brought up another weekend when Leah skipped lunch. I recognized it as one Leah had told me she didn't want to attend. Leah said, "I didn't want to go because I knew you'd be annoyed if I did." I asked, "Did I know about the lunch when you told your mom I was the reason?" She frowned. "I don't know." "That matters." Diane said, "Why? If she knew your reaction, why does she have to wait for you to say it?" "Because predicting my reaction is not the same as me making the decision." Diane said, "You're splitting hairs." Paige said, "Mom, no, that is actually different." Diane looked surprised. Paige continued, "It doesn't mean Tristan never made her feel pressured. It means we should know whether he actually said something or whether Leah assumed what he would say." That was the first shift in the room. Not everyone suddenly siding with me. Just the rules changing. Leah could no longer move between he would have been upset, he didn't like it, and he stopped me, as if those were the same thing. Diane brought up the night Paige invited Leah to stay over after the concert. She said Leah had been worried I would be angry. I said, "Paige texted me asking if Leah could stay." Diane said, "Because she knew how you were." Paige shook her head. "No, I asked because Leah made it sound like I needed to." Then Paige looked at me. And Tristan did sound annoyed. I was annoyed. Diane made a gesture like that proved everything. I said, "I was annoyed because I thought it was strange that my wife's sister was asking me if my wife was allowed to sleep at her apartment." Paige said, "That's why that one bothers me now." Leah said, "I told you to coordinate with me after that." Paige said, "You told me Tristan didn't like being put on the spot." "He didn't." I said, "I never told you that." Leah replied, "You didn't have to." There it was again. I started to argue, then stopped. Leah noticed. "What? You're right about one part." Everyone looked at me. "I did let this happen in the beginning." Diane looked confused. "Years ago, Leah used me as an excuse because she didn't want to go to something. I knew. I told her, fine. Blame me. I thought it was harmless. There were other times when I knew she told you I wanted to stay home when she was the one who didn't want to go, and I didn't correct it." Leah looked at me like she expected that admission to settle everything. I said, "That was wrong on my part. I also got colder with all of you instead of asking why every conversation felt loaded. That made this easier to believe." Diane said, "Exactly." I looked at her. "No, not exactly. I'm taking responsibility for what I actually did." Leah said, "You're making this into a trial. Then let's stop listing old weekends." Paige looked at Leah. "What about the times you told me he would get angry?" Leah said, "He would get angry." I said, "Sometimes I would get annoyed." Leah looked at me. To me, it felt like the same thing. That was probably the most honest thing she said that afternoon. I asked, "Did you feel like you couldn't go because of me?" "Sometimes." "Did I tell you not to go?" "Sometimes you said you didn't want plans to change." "That's not the same question." "I know." Her voice got quieter. "But if I knew you were going to be upset, I didn't feel free." That was hard to hear because it was not something I could disprove. I said, "Then I should have known that. If my reactions made you feel like you had to choose, we should have dealt with that between us. I can own that I got too rigid about last-minute plans. I can own that I hated dealing with your mom's pressure." Leah nodded. I continued, "But when you didn't want to go somewhere and told them I was the reason, that was still your choice." She looked down. Paige asked, "How often did you do that?" "I don't know." "More than a few times?" Leah did not answer. Diane jumped in. "Why does the number matter?" She was trying to keep peace. I said, "It was easier for her. I was the one living with the rest of it." Then I asked the question I had been waiting to ask. "Leah, did you tell them you were thinking about leaving me before you told me?" Diane immediately said she had every right to seek support. "I didn't ask whether she had the right to talk to you." Paige said quietly, "She did tell us." Leah looked at Paige. "Why are you doing this?" "Because he asked you directly. I trusted you." "And I love you," Paige said. "But you told me he knew how bad things were." Leah looked at me. "I didn't," I said. Diane said, Leah didn't know what she wanted yet. That's fine. I'm asking why everyone else knew the marriage might end before I knew. Leah began crying. I didn't know how to say it to you. Why? Because if I said it, you'd want an answer. Yes. And I didn't have one. That answer could have been I don't know. She shook her head. You don't understand what it feels like to have everyone wanting something from you. My mom wants me there. Paige wants me there. You want me to stop changing our plans. Everyone thinks their expectation is reasonable, and I'm the one in the middle. I said, sometimes you put yourself in the middle because then you didn't have to say what you wanted. Diane said, that's unfair. Leah whispered, sometimes I didn't know what I wanted. Then you could have said that too. My mom doesn't accept that. Diane started to object. Leah turned toward her. She doesn't. That was the first time Leah put responsibility directly on Diane. If I say I'm tired, you tell me family should come first. If I say I want a weekend at home, you ask why I'm pulling away. If I say I don't want to drive over, you act like I don't care. Diane said, I just want to see my daughters. I know. Then why make me sound like some monster? I'm not. I sat there listening to a conversation that should have happened years earlier. Diane said, so you blame Tristan because I love you too much? Leah said, no, I blame Tristan because you accepted his name as an answer. Diane did not take that well. Well, he certainly didn't encourage you to be close to us. I said, that's true. I stopped wanting to be around people who treated me like I controlled my wife. And how were we supposed to know otherwise? You could have asked me. That was true, but not completely fair. People tend to believe their daughter and sister. They had no reason to cross-examine every complaint. They had also spent years making comments directly to me without asking a direct question. Paige said, we all helped keep it going. Diane did not like that. I asked Leah, when you told them you might leave, what did you want from them? She was quiet. I wanted to know they would be there. That makes sense. She looked surprised. Did you think they wouldn't be there if the reason was just that you were unhappy? I don't know. Did it feel easier if I was the reason? Leah started to deny it, then stopped. Finally, she said, yes. She continued in pieces. It was easier to explain if I said we were always fighting about my family. We were fighting about your family. I know. That part wasn't fake. I know. But you made it sound more one-sided. She looked down. Yes. Paige asked, did you make it sound like he didn't want you around us? Leah said, probably. Probably. Yes. Fine. Yes. Diane said, you were under pressure. Paige looked at her mother. Mom, she can be under pressure and still have done something wrong. Leah said, I didn't think it would go this far. I asked, what did you think would happen? I don't know. You told them for years that I was the reason you said no. Then, when our marriage got bad, you told them I was making you feel trapped. What did you think they would think of me? I didn't sit there planning what they would think. I believe you. She looked at me. I think that's part of the problem. You didn't have to plan it anymore. Diane said sharply, you're making Leah ashamed in front of her family. I turned to her. She made our marriage a family story before I even knew there was a story. Diane started to answer, but Paige cut in. He should have known. Diane looked at her. Paige said, if Leah was telling us she might leave, Tristan should have known the marriage was at that point. Leah said, I was trying to figure it out. Paige answered, then tell him you're trying to figure it out. Leah stared at her sister. Paige's voice softened. I'm not saying you couldn't talk to me. I thought I was helping you through a marriage problem you had already told your husband about. That was the moment the whole arrangement stopped working. Not because everyone turned against Leah. They didn't. Diane still defended her. Paige still loved her. I still understood why she hated disappointing them. But Leah could no longer tell each of us a slightly different version and rely on the distance between us to keep those versions separate. I said I was done discussing old examples. Diane said, so that's it? You get to interrogate everyone and leave. I'm not deciding my marriage here. Leah looked at me. I need space. Are you leaving me? I don't know yet. That was the truth. But from now on, I'm not explaining your choices to your family. If you don't want to come to something, you tell them. If you say I'm the reason for something, they can ask me directly. Diane said, We're not going to call you every time Leah says you had plans. Then don't. But if it matters enough to resent me over, ask. Paige nodded. I said, and I'm not apologizing for stopping Leah from seeing you because I didn't. I will apologize for being cold. I'll apologize for snapping at you. I'll apologize for the times I acted like every family invitation was an intrusion. Those are mine. Leah was crying harder. I hated that. I also knew if I stayed, the conversation would become about calming her before either of us understood what came next. So I stood up. Leah said, "You're just leaving?" I said I need space. Can we go home together and talk? Not tonight. I left alone. Paige called 2 days later. I almost ignored it, but I answered. She said, "I owe you an apology." I waited. Not for believing my sister when she said she was unhappy. I'm not apologizing for that. You shouldn't. But I treated you like I already knew what kind of husband you were without ever asking you. I didn't exactly make it easy to ask. No, you could be a jerk. I laughed. Fair, she said, and I still think there were times you were too hard on Leah. I think you might be right. I just don't think that's the same as what I thought a week ago. No. Then she brought up the engagement dinner. She had specifically asked Leah if I was coming. Leah told her I didn't want to deal with family drama. I told Paige what Leah had said to me. Everyone needs a break from you. Paige went quiet. I didn't say that. I know. I was annoyed with you lately, but I did not tell her not to bring you. I know that too. She apologized for believing too much without checking. I apologized for assuming she hated me and becoming colder in response. She said, "I did dislike you for a while." Good to know. That got a small laugh. Then she said, "Whatever happens with you and Leah, I'm not being the messenger anymore." That was one thing we agreed on completely. Diane handled things differently. She called twice the next week and said I had torn open the family just to prove a point. I told her I would answer questions about myself, but I would not discuss Leah's feelings or explain Leah's choices for her. If she wanted to know why Leah was not attending something, she needed to ask Leah. A couple of weeks later, Diane invited us to lunch. Leah admitted she did not want to go. When I asked whether she wanted to go or only felt guilty, she told me even that question could feel like pressure from me. I accepted that. Leah texted Diane herself that she wanted the weekend at home. Diane called almost immediately, and I left the room while Leah answered. For once, the conversation belonged entirely to the person making the choice. The next few months were not dramatic in the way people might expect. There was no second twist. No affair. No hidden account. No final explosion where everybody cut everybody off. It was mostly a long series of conversations that became exhausting because the problem was bigger than any single lie. Leah and I tried. I did not leave right after the family meeting. She did not refuse responsibility. She apologized. At first, her apologies were still full of explanations. "I'm sorry, but you know how my mom is. I'm sorry, but I really did feel like you were angry. I'm sorry, but I didn't think Paige would take it that way." Over time, she got better at separating explanation from responsibility. One night she said, "I think I got addicted to not being the person who disappointed anyone." That was the closest she came to explaining it in a way I understood. She said when we first started dating, blaming me for one missed dinner felt harmless because Diane accepted Tristan has plans faster than I don't feel like coming. Once Diane already saw me as the reluctant one, it got easier. If Leah didn't want to go somewhere, she could say I wanted a quiet night. If she wanted to leave early, she could say I was tired. If she didn't want a whole weekend with family, she could say we had plans. Sometimes those excuses were partly true. Sometimes they weren't. The important part was that they worked. Diane might be annoyed with me, but she pushed Leah less. I said, so I became the pressure valve. Leah nodded. After a while, I didn't even think of it as lying. That was hard to hear. She explained that phrases like, "Tristan won't like it," or "Tristan gets annoyed," felt true enough because sometimes I did get annoyed. She never had to say, "My husband forbids me from seeing you." She could say softer things and let her family build the conclusion. When I asked if she knew that was happening, she said, "Eventually, yes." Why didn't you correct it? Because then I would have had to admit I was using it. That damaged something permanent in me. Not the first excuse. It was that once she realized her family thought I controlled her, she chose the usefulness of that belief over correcting it. We also talked about my part. I had become rigid around family plans. Diane's pressure made me defensive of our weekends, and sometimes I reacted before Leah even told me what her mother wanted. There were gatherings where Leah wanted to stay longer, and I made it obvious I was ready to leave. I could see how that wore on her. What I could not accept was the way she dealt with it. If she had told me my reactions made her feel like she needed permission, that would have been painful, but it would have been ours to address. Instead, she told her family that version while letting me believe their hostility toward me came from nowhere. When I asked how many conversations had been shaped that way, Leah said she honestly could not remember. I believed her. The pattern had become normal enough that she had stopped counting. Then I began doing something I hated. Whenever Leah told me that Paige or Diane had said something, I felt an immediate urge to verify it. I did not actually call them every time. I knew that would be unhealthy, but the question appeared in my head before I could stop it. One evening, Leah came home after seeing Paige and said, "Paige thinks you've already decided to leave." My first thought was, did Paige really say that? Leah saw my face and asked what was wrong. I told her. She looked devastated. "Do you think I'm lying right now?" I don't know. That was when I understood how deep the damage went. Even if Leah never used me as an excuse again, our ordinary conversations had become places where I checked reality instead of trusting her. Leah asked me to give it more time. I did. For a while, we had better conversations than we had in years. Leah also began telling Diane no directly. The first few times were messy. Diane would say, "Family just wants to see you." And Leah would start to explain before stopping herself and saying, "I know. I still don't want to come today." Diane did not suddenly become easy about it. She asked whether I was still influencing those decisions. The first time she did that while I was nearby, Leah said, "No, this one is me." Diane answered that she did not understand, and Leah said, "You don't have to." I watched Leah do something she had spent years avoiding. Part of me was proud of her. Another part wondered why our marriage had to nearly collapse before she could do it. Paige changed too. She stopped assuming Leah's interpretation was the complete record. If Leah described something I had supposedly said, Paige sometimes asked, "Did he say that? Or is that what you think he meant?" Leah hated that at first, but Paige told her she still trusted her feelings, just not every conclusion automatically. Diane took longer. She never fully accepted my view, and she continued to think there must have been some truth behind Leah using me as an excuse so often. There was some truth in the fact that I disliked last-minute family plans. But once I stopped being the automatic explanation, Diane had to face that Leah herself sometimes did not want to come. Their relationship did not collapse. It simply became more direct and more uncomfortable. My relationship with Diane became distant, while Paige and I became cautiously civil. Nobody switched sides completely, and nobody got a clean victory. The bigger question was Leah and me. Around the third month, she asked what I needed in order to trust her again. I did not have a satisfying answer. I need to not feel like I have to fact-check my wife. I'm telling the truth now. I know. Then what am I supposed to do? I don't know. That was the problem. There was no action she could take for a few weeks or a few months that would erase years of social reality I had not known she was shaping. She asked, "Do you think I lied to you about everything?" No. "Do you think our marriage was fake?" No. "Do you think I love you?" Yes. She looked almost angry. Then why does this feel impossible? I thought about it. Finally, I said, because loving me didn't stop you from making me the reason for choices you were afraid to own. She cried again. She said, "I didn't know it was that big." I know. I never wanted my family to hate you. I know. I never wanted to leave you because they told me to. I know. Then why isn't knowing that enough? Because intent isn't the only thing I have to live with. For years, I had felt tension with her family and trusted Leah's explanation for it. She was supposed to be the person I could compare reality with. Instead, she had been one of the people shaping the reality I was reacting to. Once I understood that, I could not go back to the old arrangement where she handled her family and I trusted her summaries. We tried more direct communication. Sometimes it helped. Sometimes it made obvious how damaged things were. If Diane texted Leah something about me, Leah would offer to show me because she wanted to prove she was no longer filtering. I did not want to see every message. If Paige said something about our marriage, Leah repeated it carefully. I found myself listening for accuracy instead of meaning. That is no way to be married. One night Leah said, I feel like I'm on probation. I don't want you to feel that way. But I am. I know. Then tell me how to get off probation. I don't think that's how this works. She asked if I had already decided. At the time, I told her no, and I meant it. I wanted the answer to become obvious because of one conversation. It never did. What became obvious slowly was the kind of husband I was turning into. More watchful. More skeptical. Less generous in how I interpreted her words. If she said her mom was upset, I wondered whether Leah had given her reason to be. If she said Paige misunderstood something, I wondered whether the misunderstanding had been encouraged. If she told me she wanted something, I sometimes wondered whether she described that desire the same way to someone else. I did not like myself in that role. And Leah did not deserve to spend the rest of her life having every sentence examined because of what she had done. Eventually, I realized staying married seemed to require one of two things. Either I would have to trust her before I actually trusted her, which would mean pretending, or she would have to live with being checked until I felt safe again, and neither of us could say whether that day would ever come. A few months after the engagement dinner, I told her I couldn't continue the marriage. We were at home. No family was there. There was no dramatic scene. Leah sat across from me and asked, Are you sure? As sure as I can be. Is this punishment? No. It feels like punishment. I know. Then what is it? I don't want to be married to someone whose stories I feel I need to verify. She looked down. And I don't want to become someone who verifies everything you say. She said, I can change. I think you are changing. That made her look up. I meant it. She had started saying no to Diane directly. She had started taking responsibility for how she described conflict. She had stopped using me as the reason. But sometimes a person can change, and the relationship can still be too damaged to continue. Leah said, Then why not stay and see? Because I've been seeing. She cried quietly. I stayed there. Not to reverse the decision. Just because 8 years of marriage deserved more than making the statement and walking out. We talked for a long time about things that had nothing to do with blame. The good years. The stupid habits we would probably miss. The fact that neither of us had imagined ending up there. At one point, Leah said, I really did love you. I know. I loved her too. That did not make the decision easier. It made it sadder. The separation unfolded over time. We did not solve every practical detail in one night. And I'm not going to turn this into a story about paperwork because that was never the point. The marriage ended after months of trying, not because Paige made one phone call and not because Leah used me as an excuse once. It ended because I realized the trust one had lost was not just trust that Leah would stop lying about family plans. It was trust that I knew how she represented our marriage when I wasn't there. During one of our final conversations, Leah asked how she should explain the separation to Diane and Paige. I told her, however you want. She looked uncomfortable. Then she said, Could I say it was a mutual decision? It would be easier. I knew why she wanted that wording. Mutual decision sounded cleaner. No one had to ask who decided first. No one had to be disappointed in her. No one had to think she had failed to save something. It was the same instinct that had started all of this. Years earlier, Leah had not wanted to tell her mother she didn't feel like attending a dinner, and I had laughed and said, Fine. Blame me. I thought I was giving my wife an easy out. This time, I didn't get angry. I didn't tell her what she was allowed to say. I just said, You can tell them anything you choose. But this time, call it your choice. If you liked it, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the upcoming stories.